Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today. I'm Karen McBride. I am Director of Client Services at Co-Communications. We are a marketing and public relations agency with offices in Connecticut and New York. And today I am here with 17Forward86. We are collaborating with the coalition on the Route 17 expansion project. And our panel today is Mark Baez. Mark is President and CEO of the Sullivan County Partnership for Economic Development, and Mark is also co-chair of the 17Forward86 Coalition. And we also have with us Michael Fleischer. Michael is President of Strategic Public Affairs and also a member of our 17Forward86 Coalition. So we have the experts here to talk all about the coalition and to talk about the project and the latest updates. So let's begin, Mark, with you. If you could share with the group the history of 17Forward86, how it came to be, and what was the thinking and reasoning behind it.
Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. So basically, this third lane discussion has been around for quite some time. It began approximately 2 decades ago, when Senator Schumer had the foresight to look at the corridor and the vision to see that as it was developing way back then, that there was going to be a need for a third lane to address some of the traffic issues that he had already seen and his people had already seen were becoming, at the time, a little bit of an issue. And with development just around the corner and the trajectory of development and at the rate of the development that was taking place towards the end of the 90s and early 2000s, that certainly this is something that he had kept an eye on for a while. Fast forward to 2013, and Senator Schumer was pivotal in sourcing money for a study. And that study in 2013, and Michael Fleischer can get into the weeds on that, basically determined that there would be a need for a third lane in the future. The study was done well before any of the latest development was taking place in Orange County and in Sullivan County. So it's prior to the casino, prior to the water parks, prior to Legoland, prior to Amy's Kitchen, and a whole host of different projects that have since either have been built or are in the approval stages at this point moving forward. And the study, like is typical in a lot of cases, kind of sat around for a while. There was an event that we all attended. I think it was Maureen's annual meeting event, Orange County Partnership. And Michael Fleischer was at the event, and he brought up this issue that there's this 2013 study out there. And is anybody looking at that or following up or doing anything about it? And at the event as well were myself, Maureen, Jimmy Smith from Advanced Testing, and Nancy Proyak from the Citizens Foundation. And we got together to, we really ought to dive into this, because at that point, Maureen and I certainly, and Jimmy as well, were feeling the pressure of some of the things that were coming in online in terms of development. And we had seen the change in the traffic patterns back then. And as a result of the new projects that were going on, some of the things were starting to come to fruition that were predicted long before then. And so the coalition began very small. It was just the 4 of us initially to try and get funding for the planning and environmental linkage study, which is underway right now, a step that's necessary in order to move forward with the environmental review process and the engineering and the actual construction down the road. And the coalition grew. Elect 825, very interested in the project for a lot of different reasons, thought that it was an important and a priority for them to get involved. And we started to get together and formalize the 17Forward86 coalition. Obviously, legally with the group formed in its current fashion today. Over the years, we began to understand that it wasn't just about dealing with development on the corridor or future economic development that it was more a concern of safety issues, transportation issues, school districts transport on the corridor. We have medical centers on the corridor. We have state troopers, sheriffs that are dealing with accidents and other issues on the corridor. And from an environmental perspective, we thought it was important to be ahead of this curve and to address this issue. So we formulated a coalition consisting of a little over 200 end groups, and those include school districts, towns, villages, healthcare centers, nonprofits, economic development corporations, elected officials, and it's really a diverse mix of people that understand that this is an issue that we have to be ahead of rather than react to when it's already too late. And you can argue in some instances in Lower Orange County that we're right in the heat of things right now. Personally, I travel this route every day. I travel it either in the morning or in the afternoon. I drop off my son to Catholic school, and I can tell you at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, 3:15, it is a busy place. I had to drop him off this morning. It was already busy this morning. And if, when people are working on a bridge or some kind of road work, it really comes to a halt in certain spots. And then you look at some of the activities that we experience here in Sullivan County and the Sullivan Catskills, and the weekend population grows significantly, anywhere from 50 to 60,000 on any given weekend. In the summer population, we go from 78,000 people that live here year-round to well over 350,000 people that come here to their second homes, to their camps, just to spend the weekend up here, to enjoy some of the assets that we have in Sullivan County. And so that really puts pressure on that system, particularly between around the end of May to the beginning of September. So add into that the projects that we mentioned before, the casino and the hotel water park, a lot of boutique hotels being built in Sullivan County right now. These destination places, the breweries, the microbreweries, and you add some of the industrial commercial development taking place in Orange County, Woodbury Commons growth, Amy's Kitchen, Amazon, Legoland, and you can start to see that the pressure is mounting, and we really need to address this sooner than later. So the coalition, we went out and we raised funds to be able to hire professionals to, lobby for us, to work for the coalition directly and to help carry our message forward, to be able to hire professionals like Karen to carry the marketing and the messaging of what it is we are trying to get across. And so this coalition is now, a solid group of people and growing, and really behind this effort to expand 17 where it needs to be expanded and deal with the interchange issues that we all know exist in certain parts of the coalition, not the highway.
I'm sorry, I just want to pull up on our screen to show the viewers some of the members talked about.
Yep, great. As she's doing that, something to consider is that there are sections of the roadway that are already 3 lanes. If you go up, particularly in Sullivan County, if you go up Wurtsboro Hill, it's 3 lanes. If you go down Wurtsboro Hill, it's 3 lanes. So really, it's in our case, is to address those areas that don't have that. You can see from the website, www.17Forward86.org, the makeup of the coalition, really a diverse group. And so, we're addressing multiple issues here that we think are critical to our quality of life, to our environment, to our success, to our, opportunities that we're going to continue to create here in both Orange and Sullivan counties in the near future. So that's kind of the synopsis of how 1746 began.
And then, Mark, as you were saying, this is a photo. I'm getting an echo. Can you folks hear that?
Nope, we're good.
Okay, great. This photo here is actually from our launch press conference up in Albany in March of 2018. So
we went to Albany, and the initial struggle was to get the funding needed for the planning and environmental linkage study. So that was a $5 million estimate to do that. And so, it was difficult, but we went out and we worked hard to get that funding in place. Now we're at a point where we need to raise an additional, I think, Mike, you can correct me on this, $30 to $33 million for the engineering of that once the planning and environmental linkage study is completed.
That's
and
correct.
Right now, the estimates for doing the project itself is somewhere plus or minus, I guess it's $500 million total. That would look at around 45 miles of the corridor. I don't know that that's going to be the end product. This process is deciding that, is going to ultimately, all of the research and all of the the diving in deep on what are the issues are and where the needs are, will ultimately fine tune that to see where it is needed most. And so, but those are the numbers right now, and we continue to work forward to try and get this project done sooner than later.
Well, thank you, Mark. That was for the history and for bringing us up to speed. And this would be a perfect segue, Mike, for you to jump in and tell us what is being done now. And the New York State Department of Transportation hosted a virtual workshop last night on the Pell study. So if you could give us a little bit of background on that, where we are and what the next steps are.
Yeah, sure. As Mark said, New York State DOT issued a couple of 100-page with charts and graphs and data corridor study in 2013 that identified the issues along the corridor and recommended solutions along the corridor. They looked at bus rapid transit, they looked at HOV lanes, they looked at light rail, but for a variety of reasons, the lack of density across the corridor, the amount of right-of-way and environmental impacts of a BRT system or an HOV lane, they recommended additional general use lane, park and ride lots, and continued interaction with Metro North on their west of Hudson transit solution for the future. I will say that even the 2013 study was very robust in the way of public engagement. They had 6 public workshops. They had a public officials committee meetings. It was very in-depth study that looked at all of the issues, environmental, quality of life, land use, and identified these improvements for the Route 17 corridor. As Mark said, this is almost 10 years ago. And obviously the situation has gotten worse due to economic development activities, which is a good thing, which is what we support. But for the corridor to serve the people who live, work, and visit here, those recommendations were considered very important at the time and are only more important now. Back in 2018-19, we were able to secure $5 million to do what's called a planning and environmental linkages study, which is a relatively new type of activity from the Federal Highway Administration. The purpose of what we call the Pell study, or a Pell, is to streamline the process by identifying issues, environmental, quality of life, earlier in the process, before an environmental impact statement begins. It's intended to accelerate the project delivery by identifying situations and issues earlier and addressing them earlier by engaging the public, which, as Karen said, last night was the second public workshop, widely attended, and there'll be another one, I believe, in September. So as the corridor and as we talk about the Route 17 corridor and the improvements, this is a corridor first that's been looked at as a corridor, which I think is important and what planning professionals would like to see, not just look at one project in isolation of others. We're looking at a corridor and how it interacts for the people who live and work and visit there. So when you look at the 2013 study and the ongoing Pell study, the amount of public engagement is quite significant and quite unique, which I think is beneficial for the project and beneficial for the people who are working on it and the people who are the public who's trying to engage and have their voices heard. So we are in the midst of the Pell study, which should conclude in October. Last night, and I will go back. The Pell study has looked at 2018 data, which is a little bit more recent than the 2013 data that was used, and it showed that what some people may have believed, well, this is just a Friday night, Sunday morning problem for vacationers to the Catskills. That's not the case. This is in fact, the time period that was used, the data was in May of 2018. It was even before Memorial Day. Mm-hmm. So this is a constant problem, as Mark talked about earlier. It's having real impacts on safety, on economic development. There's weaving locations that are a real problem. There's interchanges that don't work. People can't get to where they need to be. As Mark said, first responders have trouble getting out on the highway. People have trouble scheduling their day. It's having a real impact, and solutions are needed. And I think, thankfully, we're in the process of identifying those solutions and have broad support for those solutions from the public. The public officials who have supported this project, Republican, Democrat, they've all supported the project. There's no partisan. As Mark said, the environmental community has been engaged in it. We're trying to find and we're supporting a solution that works for the environment, or works for the economy, that works for safety. And that's what DOT is in the process of identifying. That should finish it in October and make those recommendations public. They've looked at the data. They use what that's called the best practice model from NIMTIC, which is the MPO for the region. So they'll be able to look at current conditions and project future conditions. And now with COVID, that's, I think, only increased the amount of traffic and amount of activity along that corridor, as people can, live here more year round. And the influx of people coming to the Catskills to do that has only made these improvements more and more needed. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, clearly, both of you have shown that there is diverse support for this project, both from your membership and for those who have, lended support for this. It ranges from businesses to civic organizations to first responders to law enforcement to the medical community. And I wanted to see if you could talk a little bit about some of what you've been hearing from colleagues or from elected officials about why this needs to happen and why it needs to happen now. It's been taking so long to get everything done. So why is it so critical now?
Well, I can tell you this. I've been staring at a Future 86 sign probably since 2002. And we still don't have an 86 corridor, at least on this part of New York State Route 17. I always found that interesting that the busier part of 17 didn't get attention as much as the northwestern part of 17 did, past Elmira going west. So we have a little bit of an I-86 corridor up there, and hopefully we're edging toward that here with some of the work that's going on. In Sullivan County, we've reached out to a whole host of different elected officials and supervisors, school districts, and we had some overwhelming support with the understanding of what the concept was and what was going to happen on 17. Folks live here, they travel here. They might not live here. They might work in Orange County and commute and travel in. They have a good understanding of the issues associated with 17. Like any other project, there are those that don't want anything to change, and we understand that. They have their reasons for that. One thing that I should note, that there was a study done similarly around the 2011-2013 time by the Open Space Institute that identified growth patterns along 17 and in counties. And what they said about Sullivan County was Sullivan County could grow 35% in growth and yet still not negatively affect any of the environmental assets that we have in Sullivan County. I don't think we're ever going to grow 35% in my lifetime or my son's lifetime or maybe even my grandson's lifetime. But if we're able to achieve 5% growth or 10% growth, that's an enormous percentage for us to create more opportunities along the corridor, particularly in Sullivan County, in my case. So, and they're not exactly an institution that is, full speed on development. In fact, if anything, they're very concerned with the environment and very protective of conservation issues and things that are associated with that. So even that group back then, before all this development took place, certainly was aware that there was room for growth up here, and there's certainly something that we can move forward with without it being a negative impact. That said, again, from my perspective, there's been an overwhelming support for the project across all institutions and sectors so far in Sullivan County. The business community, obviously, because they know that it's going to be helpful to them, but certainly the elected officials, the townships, the villages, some of the school districts and other nonprofit groups and civic groups have been supportive of the process.
And I'd also wanted to encourage our audience, if you have questions, we'd love to take those questions or comments. So please feel free to put those into the chat function and we'll answer them as, and address them as best we can. So Mike, back to you. You were talking about the moving forward and the next steps. And if you could just give a little more detail about, what to expect, what's, coming down the pike.
Sure. And I'd just like to build on what Mark said, and what the studies looked at was, as a transportation person, you want to use, the infrastructure you have the best you can. And to have that development along the highly functioning Route 17, because you're already seeing now people diverting off of Route 17 and taking back roads and alternative roadways, which is contrary to kind of smart growth and it's contrary to corridor planning. That's, you want the highly functioning roadways to serve the purpose that they're meant to serve, and preserve their, scenic beauty as well. No, obviously, that's a balance that we support striking, is make the improvements necessary, but make them in a way that's consistent in the context of the community that it goes through. And that's what I think we've been advocating is keep the development needed, the economic development needed that Mark's talking about for quality of life and jobs and economic security. Make the improvements to the infrastructure you have and use that facility as best as you can. And by adding the capacity needed, we can do that. And I think that's why there has been broad support. I think, New York State DOT, which ultimately will be the decider of what gets done and how it gets done. But they've issued, a study back in 2013 that made the recommendations. They've now engaged the public in a public process during the Pell and receiving that input and providing the data. So I think from whether it's the Department of Transportation, the public officials, the local economic development experts like Mark and Maureen Hallahan, the sheriffs, the school districts, that there is broad support for making the improvements along Route 17 that are needed for quality of life and economic development. So now, as we're in the middle of the Pell process, there'll be another public workshop in September. They'll issue a report in October, which will make more. They'll have more data than 2013. They'll essentially be putting some more flesh on the bones of the 2013 study, updating it based on more current data, more current information, more current standards of what's going, what the roadway needs, more current information about the development that's occurred since 2013 and the development that's planned for the future, and trying to accommodate the change in travel patterns that COVID has brought, with more and more people being able to live farther and farther from where they work by working remotely. Once that is issued in in October, Then the next step would be an environmental impact statement for the corridor, which would, again, dig deeper in on the environmental issues, the land use issues, and ultimately that could take a year, year and a half, and ultimately lead to preliminary engineering and some preliminary design work, so that the corridor, the improvements that are needed along the corridor can be identified, can be approved by the state DOT, officially approved by the Federal Highway Administration, so that construction work can begin. But again, there'll be more. There's been lots of public engagement so far. There's more to come in the Pell process, and then there'll be even more in the environmental impact statement process.
And again, the coalition and all the efforts have been to keep this top of mind, and everyone has been doing, terrific job with that. Because now is the right time with the federal government. Word from Washington that infrastructure is a priority, correct?
Yes, there's the current federal transportation bill, multi-year bill, expires at the end of September. September 30th is the end of the federal fiscal year. And this year, at the end of that year, at the end of September, the federal government will have to establish a new multi-year surface transportation bill, which would include highways and bridges, transit. Obviously, there's discussions in Washington about broadband, affordable housing. That may or may not all come together, but for the surface transportation, the highway piece, that expires at the end of September. And there's also been, the president has offered, a Jobs Act bill, an infrastructure bill, which would provide a one-time infusion of highway and bridge monies and transit monies and broadband and others. So there's two conversations going on simultaneously. Whether they'll be rolled in together or done separately remains to be seen, but there certainly is an appetite and indications that the federal government will be providing additional infrastructure funds to New York and to other states to deliver these high priority projects to improve road and bridge conditions, promote economic development, promote affordable housing, increase safety. So we are at a unique time, and this project is uniquely positioned after, as Mark said, 20, 25 years of talking about it, to finally get work done that needs to be done for the people who live here now and the people who live and visit here in the future.
That's great. We have to make sure our region gets its share. Now, we talked before, Mark, you were talking a little bit about tourism, and you may have mentioned also with the pandemic, we've been seeing a migration out of New York City into Sullivan and other areas.
Very, very critical. I'm going to answer Leslie Smith's question in just a minute. So Sullivan County has gone through, obviously, its ups and downs. It's been a very tourist-oriented county for 100 years or more, right? So we were the Borscht Belt. Everybody from New York came up on the weekends. At one point, we had the O&W train here. Everybody came up on the weekend. They went back to work all week. The husbands and the wives, whatever, the kids stayed up at camp. And so we've always been the backyard for New York City, the playground, if you will. So we've seen development surges and speculative surges take place over the last 30 years. In 1989, there was a big second home boom, and everybody was building their McMansions up in the woods up here, and the savings and loan crisis kind of put an end to that. And so it lasted about 6 months to a year, and then everything went back to normal. Just before 9/11, everything started to take off again. We were talking about 5 casinos at one time. There was a lot of speculation again. 9/11 hits, shuts everything down once again. In 2007, just before that, making big strides in getting Sullivan County going again. And again, the financial crisis hampered that as well. As the discussion of proposed licensing of casinos took place in New York State, it really started to generate some more energy around 2012, 2013. Casino was built. People kind of came in, did their investing, did certain things over about a year period, maybe a year and a half, and then everyone went back to normal again. The COVID crisis is markedly different. The energy and the long-term sustainability of the interest is what we regard here, the economic development folks and elected officials here, is something that's not going to go away anytime soon. That's going to continue to go from now into the future. We've all talked about some of the real estate prices going berserk all over the Hudson Valley, if you will, folks coming upstate. There's a mass exodus from New York City because of COVID-19, because of the ability to work from home, because of some of the dangerous conditions that are being experienced in New York City now with some of the looting and other things. People are concerned with their safety. Our real estate has gone up 100% between March of last year to March of this year. That's March. Not a lot of things get sold in March. It's still in the wintertime up here. So, but that's gone up. Our median home values has gone up around 60%. There's no inventory now here. All the good inventory has been sold. Prices have gone up dramatically. The interest here is phenomenal, to the point where even national housing development firms are looking at Sullivan County for major projects where they wouldn't have even considered that prior to COVID because there wasn't any demand for that space here. Now there's a considerable amount of demand, again, from folks that are coming up from the lower part of the Hudson Valley in New York City, and it puts pressure all along the corridor. So as values go up in Westchester and they go up in Orange geometrically, it makes the next county a little bit more attractive because they can get more bang for their buck, so to speak. And we're seeing that here. We don't see an end to that anytime soon. We think it's going to continue to go based on the fact that everything has been sold out and there's still demand for the homes here in Sullivan County and for housing alternatives for folks that are going to work at the new jobs that are being created, are going to work at jobs even in Orange County. We've gone from a county that would import most of its labor, or export most of its labor, to a county that is importing labor now because we need the work here. To address Leslie's question, there was a lot of time spent, and I think as Michael alluded to, WSP, the consulting firm, has spent a lot of time focused on the interchanges along the corridor. Particularly, they spend a considerable amount of time on exit 124, down in Goshen, down in the Chester area, and they're fully aware of the issue there in terms of 17M. And I thought, and Mike, you can weigh in, I thought they presented a reasonable solution to that, several options, but one that I think may solve that problem there, and we think it will. I thought they had good alternatives to directing traffic so that 17M is not a parking lot. Some of the side roads aren't an issue, and there's easy access back and forth from 17 back onto the local roads. What do you think, Mike?
Yes, I agree. And I think, as you said, they have spent a considerable amount of time not just worried about what's going on Route 17, but what's going on the ancillary roads and the impact, and how do you connect those roads to each other or to Route 17 in a way that allows people, especially people making really short trips. They just got to go one exit, and now they're stuck. How do you improve the whole corridor and the roads leading into and out of the corridor to get people to where they're trying to go? And how do you modify an interchange but don't cut off a community? And how do you do that smartly? Do you combine interchanges so people continue to have good access? Because the point of the road is to serve the community, not and do it in a way that makes sense. And they're looking at grade separated interchanges, better interchanges, maybe combining interchanges, certain areas expanding an interchange from being what they would call just kind of an off ramp to a full interchange that better serves the community. So I think Mark's right that they are looking at what the impacts are of what's going on Route 17 and how it impacts 17M. There was a discussion on Route 6 as well. How do you connect that better? So there's a lot to this Pell study and a lot that's being looked at that's intended to provide community-wide improvements.
You can find more information. they're posting that information on the website. So we'll be able to forward to Vision so you can check in on, and they actually show you the exact interchanges and what the alternatives are, and they provided that last night. So we will have access to that and be able to provide that information as well.
And I just wanted to share Leslie's added another comment. If exit 127 is closed, the tractor trailers that use that exit go to the Chester Industrial Park will need to use exit 126, which is already a problem in the village.
Yeah, and as part of that discussion last night, they spent a considerable amount of time addressing that particular issue, and they understand the dynamics there. So that will be addressed as part of the upgrades.
Great. So we were talking about tourism and the migration from New York City. This is all about people and safety. And I know you've both heard from first responders, you've heard from medical professionals about the importance of enhancing mobility on Route 17, specifically because of safety and getting, folks where they need to go in emergency situations. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, the coalition has been endorsed by both the sheriff of Orange County, sheriff of Sullivan County. There's concern for them to be able to get to an incident, to a situation where they have to get to. I've seen it. We've experienced it when we have inclement weather in certain parts of the corridor. There's 2 lanes, and so a truck goes down, a car goes down, somebody slides and hits a guardrail. A simple tap on the guardrail and everybody's fine creates this backlog of traffic from a simple rubbernecking situation. So a 3rd lane would help the state troopers or the sheriffs be able to direct traffic on that lane, close off the lanes that they need to clean up the incident or to address the incident, while they're able to continue to direct traffic and keep the traffic flowing. And that's certainly of major concern to them, to folks that are EMTs, on the end side too, at the healthcare centers, urgent care centers that are expecting to get people in a reasonable time frame to be able to be taken care of. It's not uncommon for an incident to happen in the Rock Hill area, those areas where it really shuts down the highway for a considerable amount of time. So those are part of the things that the folks are concerned about in terms of a safety perspective. And again, keep in mind, there are multiple school districts around this corridor, and there's a lot of bus traffic that goes up and down that road as well. So, in early mornings and afternoons, they're getting used by Minnesink and Monticello and Liberty school districts and some of the private, transportation service providers that deliver the kids to the schools are utilizing that corridor as well. So it's not just about getting to work and back from work and economic development. There are other issues that we certainly have to deal with along that corridor.
And a lot of families, right? And with Legoland and, all the families traveling there, of course.
Exactly. So, you add, it's not even really open yet at this point, just it's soft opening. So when that fully opens, when the water park opens fully again, when the casino goes full speed again, and then add to that the traditional travel upstate. Last weekend was a pretty busy weekend. 4th of July is going to be a tremendous weekend for folks coming up here, and virtually all summer long. And then depending on, you have a certain concert night at Bethel Woods, you'd be surprised that we're a little lower, right in the middle of the county, lower than exit 104 at Bridgeville, and traffic goes all the way down, depending on who's playing that night, particularly on a Friday night. So you get a Dave Matthews on a Friday night, and there's a lot of interest, and there's a lot of folks coming up to certainly see that and enjoy themselves at Bethel Woods, and it does have an impact on the traffic flow.
Yeah, and if I could add just on the safety aspect, the state DOT has a very robust, what they call high accident locations, HAL, priority location system, where they keep an eye on areas of a roadway that have particularly high accident rates in relation to other parts of that corridor, which makes them study it and take a look at it to see what's going on there. And Route 17 has a bunch of those. A lot of weavings by the interchanges and the substandard interchanges where people don't have a lot of room to accelerate to get on the road. create safety problems, which will also be addressed as part of this Pell study, and ultimately the plan to address it as part of the improvements that are made is to address those high accident locations.
And I would imagine the folks that live nearby, it's also a safety issue and quality of life issue for them as well. If cars are coming off the highway to avoid the traffic and they're going through some of the neighborhoods and past people's houses.
Oh, absolutely. And gets back to what I said before is you want to have Route 17 function at a high level so that the traffic that's supposed to be on it is on it, and not using local roads that have no shoulders or very short turning radii that have people living along them. That you're trying to keep the traffic where it belongs. And when there's heavy congestion on Route 17, people look for alternatives and go through communities that's not serving the community well, and it's not serving the traveling public very well.
For one area that was discussed significantly last night was exit 120, right, where the plaza is. So we know that where Garnet Medical is now, that the eastern bound side has been accomplished, has been constructed. They still haven't done the western bound side yet, and there are a lot of issues associated with that. It was interesting when they did the polling of the areas that folks in Orange County thought should be a priority. I think most of the people put their dot on exit 120. So people coming and trying to get on 211 or get off 211 and access some of the shopping opportunities and restaurants and stuff, is certainly an issue too. So yes, there are those areas that they're very, very well aware that a priority concern in terms of, avoiding having major catastrophic situations in those particular areas.
And then we've also heard about, environmental concerns, and certainly from what I've seen from the studies and what everyone has been advocating for, the environment is an important part of this. And we talk about emissions and we talk about idling cars and some of the dangers of that. But the project itself is also keeping that in mind with how the construction would be done.
Yes, absolutely. And, in addition to, as you said, idling cars, they have a real environmental impact, negative environmental impact. But what DOT is looking at is how to build the third lane in the most environmentally sound way. There's many places where the median is available, so there'd be no right-of-way impacts. And in fact, as I said earlier, the HOV lanes and the bus rapid transit were not initially recommended due to a lack of density along the corridor that would make them work well or be cost effective, and to the fact that there'd be right-of-way impacts, that you would have to take some of the roadway alongside the road and make its footprint bigger. So what they're looking at, and they're looking at the alternatives, is adding the third lane in the middle with a median barrier, so that you do not need to take right-of-way along the roadway, so you keep the footprint of Route 17 what it essentially is today. And there'll be, there's some shoulder issues that they'll have to address to make sure that they have, they'll have looking at 9-foot shoulders to preserve safety. As Mark said, if there's an incident, you want to have shoulders available to make sure that you can move a car off the roadway and get the roadway back to functioning. So the environmental impacts of the roadway and how to improve the roadway in an environmentally sound manner is something that's getting a lot of attention this early in the process. And I think that's significant, that here we are just in a planning process. We're already looking at what's the environmentally most sound way to make these improvements to enhance the environment and not negatively impact it.
And things are going to change, right? So we understand there's an electrification to vehicles. In my opinion, vehicles are going to be around for the rest of my lifetime. I can tell you that, right? Whether they're electric vehicles that are not electric vehicles raises a whole other issue, right, Mike? So where do they charge? Are we going to put charging stations at the park and rides? Are they going to be there for a little while their car is getting charged and those folks get back on the highway? So there's a lot of things you got to look at to what may happen in the future. There's some people that are concerned with if the third lane would induce more development as we move forward. And they compared us to California and some other places. I don't think that's a good comparison. My answer to that is, lower in the Hudson Valley, you're constrained by the Hudson River and you're constrained by the Pennsylvania border. So you have this pie, right? So basically down in Westchester and in Rockland, there's really no room to expand other than go into another state, right? So as you move up the Hudson Valley, there's a lot more land the further north you go. For example, Sullivan County is 1,100 square miles, and there's a lot of choices. So as folks move more north, northern Orange County, that opens up the Poconos, it opens up, western New York, it opens up going to the Adirondacks, up to 87 Thruway. You have a lot of options in terms of where development can go. So this notion that because there's a third lane put in, all of a sudden, we're going to become Westchester or Rockland County in terms of density, was not going to happen in my lifetime, my kids or my grandkids. I don't see that as a major problem, although that's some folks are perceiving that. That is one heck of a lot of development that would have to take place in a very short period of time. But certainly there will be cars, there will be automobiles. Maybe they're autonomous, maybe they're not in the foreseeable future. And so that roadway is going to continue to get use as we continue to grow moving forward.
And I see we have a comment I just want to read from Lou and Gracia. I am participating in the Pell study from the town of Wallkill side, specifically exit 120 and 122. Just wanted to share that.
So it's being addressed. Let's say that, and a lot of the interchanges, not just in Orange County. They mentioned, several in Sullivan County as well, 4 or 5 of them to be exact, that they're going to look at and address that they see as a problem. And as you go into 120, right? So you want to go to Newburgh, and you're coming down 17, and folks are coming off that a 211 exit, getting back on 17. What do you have? You have about seems like a 50 to 100 yard stretch where you have to get off and get on that exit to go towards the other side of Middletown West, right? So it's an interesting little interchange down there that I'm sure they're looking at as well.
So for the coalition, 17Forward86, you've all been investing so much of your time. And if you could wave a magic wand, I guess I'll say, Mark, what would you ask for from the state? What would you like to see right away?
So like you had mentioned before that there was a little hiatus. COVID didn't help us, and it stopped everything, including this particular activity. Wasn't our priority at the time, understandably. But from early on this spring on, I think things are moving at a more consistent pace. So the idea that they're going to be able to complete this Pell by fall is good, right? So we'll take this input, we'll get it done. And actually, I think like they pushed it up. We're going to do it by later in the fall. They pushed it up.
Supposed to be done by December. They moved it up 2 months to finish.
So they are working hard to expedite the process. In my world, I'd like to have funding for the engineering and the environmentals in place, that you mentioned before. We're working on that now to be able to be ahead of each stage, not wait for something to be done and then it sits there for a year or 6 months and we're going to try and raise money for the next stage. We're already ahead of the game. We're working on trying to get that funding in place to get the environmental work done on that. And then as soon as that funding is in place, we'll be working on locking in the capital costs, the $500 million over however many years that we're looking to get the road work done. So in my world, sooner is better. I'd like to put a number on it, a year, but sometimes it gets delayed. I'd like to have it done yesterday, but we're probably looking at 2 or 3 years out before we see anything going on, right? In terms of heavy duty construction.
Sure. COVID threw a curveball at us all.
Yeah, and it did to the state, obviously, and in the past, the state DOT and the Metropolitan Transportation Authority would both have 5-year plans that are on the same timeline. But due to the fact that New York State DOT's capital program is funded by 40% through federal funds, and that, as I said earlier, the federal program is expiring and the COVID, they are now only have a 2-year plan, and they've just begun the 2nd year of its capital plan. The idea is that in October or in the fall, the Pell will be complete. The picture of what additional funds, hopefully, that the federal government will be providing to the state will become more clarified. And the state will be positioned to kind of add those 3 years back into their capital plan. And obviously, we would look to seek to have these improvements to Route 17 be incorporated into DOT's multi-year capital program. I think, we have the advantage of having the Pell study ongoing. We have the advantage of bipartisan support, and we have the advantage of these studies that have already been done that identified the problem and recommended solutions. So, obviously, sooner rather than better would be better. And as Mark said, I think it's important that we transition into the next phase of the environmental process and preliminary engineering, so that we can show our federal partners that this project is going to be ready to go. And if the funding's made available, it will get spent and spent well.
And obviously, Mike mentioned that the capital plan might change. When we last looked at this, the last proposed budget for the 5-year capital plan, this project was somewhere around 1.6% of the overall capital plan. So in terms, you hear big numbers, 500 million, 700 million, sounds like, and it is a lot of money. Not poo-pooing that, but in the whole scheme of things, in terms of the overall capital plan budget, it's 1.6% of the overall budget. So there'll be a lot of bang for your buck in terms of alleviating a problem and helping the Mid-Hudson area and the Sullivan Catskills areas grow. For percentage-wise, not a great portion of the overall capital plan budget.
I see Leslie has another comment or question. Making it easier to travel, commute, and people will. I've seen the booms in development when the Tappan Zee Bridge opened, and again as each section of the thruway and the quickway opened. Right, sure. And we also worked on the Tappan Zee Bridge campaign. I'll just put that out there. So that was an amazing project. So I know that 17Forward86 has tremendous support. If I may, I just wanted to pull up our website just to show, because we want more support. We could just to show folks how they can get involved if they want to. So if you just bear with me for a second, we also did we also have a survey on the website. It's not letting me pull this up, sorry.
And so the website is www.17Forward86. You can easily, support the coalition. There's over 200, like we said before, diverse groups that are involved. Some of those you'll be familiar with.
Here we go.
She pulls up the page, and that's the front page to get involved. It's very simple. I don't think there's several steps to get involved. It explains who we are, what we're all about, why we should be doing this at this point, and how you can get involved in support of what it is that we're trying to do here on the expansion.
And then I mentioned a petition that we have now. We actually have a couple of hundred signatures on our petition about why this is important and why you want to get involved. So we would encourage folks to go to our site, as Mark said, 17Forward86.org, and take a look at some of the information we have. There's information about joining the coalition. You can see who is part of the coalition and all the different organizations that are supporting. And then there's just factual information about the area, the tourism, the growth in population that's expected in Sullivan and Orange County, the growth in tourism. So there's lots of information on our site. We'd encourage you to just take a peek and, certainly reach out to us if there's anything that we could, any information or any questions you have. We'd be happy to answer those for everyone. So we have a few more minutes, Mike and Mark. Is there anything else that you'd like to share with folks about the project, about 17 Forward?
For me, just get involved. I mean, we have a public session now in September coming up. The consulting group has this whole Zoom webinar situation dialed in pretty easily. It's very effective. They're doing instant surveys while we're sitting there online, and you have results come up automatically. They have a good handling. It's an easy process. Get involved. I think it's the last public meeting before they do the report. So I'd encourage everyone to watch out for when the actual date is and get the URL, register, and input, get involved so that they can address some of your concerns that you may have that they may not be covering or we may have not thought of. So certainly get involved and be a part of the process, and things would go a lot better off with more input from everybody.
Yeah, and I would say that this has been a project that has as it's kind of at its core been about community input. As I said, there was a 2013 study. Now you'll have the Pell study, and they're looking at a corridor. It's what you would want transportation professionals to do: is look at a full corridor. What's going on? How can it be improved? How can it best serve its intended function? And I think that's really what the coalition is supporting, and I think that's what the Pell is doing. And I think when that last night's recording and presentation will be put on DOT's website. If you're interested, I think people will be surprised at how much attention to detail, how much they're looking at, how much data points they have to make the improvements that will benefit the community and the people who want to come and visit and work in the region. And that's really the intent of the project, is to enhance the viability of the region for safety and economic development and quality of life.
And Mike, you mentioned before that the DOT is going to be posting that on their website. The workshops, the 2 workshops, one is available, the other one will be posted, and then there's also information, specific details about the study. Yeah,
and I don't know. I think people can go to the NISDOT website and then just search for Route 17 Pell, and then they should be directed right to all the project information, past presentations, past studies, and how to get involved.
And of course, again, on our website, to reach out to us, because we'd be happy to respond. You can just go onto our site and send us an email, and we can get back to you with less in the weeds information, I guess, than on the DOT site.
Yes, absolutely. No, I do think it's been it's a project that's been long discussed, and we're getting to the point where we're at a critical juncture where it can finally come to fruition. And I think that's what's exciting about today, and about the public engagement and what DOT is doing and what the coalition is doing.
Well, Michael Fleischer and Mark Baez, thank you both so much for providing so much information, and thank you to everyone today for joining us. We hope this was helpful, and again, please reach out to us at 17Forward86.org, and we'll be happy to answer your questions.